Chapter 13, the endocrine system, screencast 3. Now, the previous chapter focused primarily on the hormones of the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary and the connection between how they work together. This screencast will be focusing on the hormones coming from the other organs that are considered to be endocrine in nature. The first that we're going to look at is the pancreas, and I want to start this off really importantly because the pancreas is primarily actually an exocrine organ that produces pancreatic juice, which is mostly digestive enzymes that it's going to send to the small intestine. Now, if we look at the pancreatic hormones, these play a role in regulating blood glucose. Now, there are endocrine cells in what are known the islets of Langerhans. Typically, you might just see this as islet cells. Now, alpha cells secrete glucagon, beta cells secrete insulin, and delta cells secrete somatostatin. We probably are going to focus just on insulin and glucagon. I don't see myself going into a lot of detail or asking questions with regards to somatostatin. Now, glucagon is responsible for increasing blood glucose. It's going to cause the breakdown of glycogen in the liver into glucose. Insulin is the opposite. That's going to lower blood sugar. And what it does, it promotes uptake of glucose by cells within the liver, muscle, and adipose tissue. It also promotes conversion of glucose into glycogen, protein, and fat. We want to think of insulin primarily as a storage hormone. Okay, that's important. Somatostatin actually inhibits the secretion of glucagon and insulin, regulates other hormones, but I'm not going to talk about somatostatin ever again. I want you to focus primarily on glucagon and insulin. You want to be comfortable with the cells that they're coming from. Glucagon is coming from the alpha cells, and insulin is coming from the beta cells, as we saw previously. Okay, so alpha cells, glucagon, beta cells, insulin, and here we see the general function associated with the pancreatic hormones. Now here we're looking at overall what happens with regards to after a meal. So after a meal, we're going to see an increase in blood glucose levels, and this is going to result in an increase in the secretion of insulin and a decrease in the secretion of glucagon. So that results in bringing blood glucose levels back to normal. And then what we're going to see as we normalize, insulin secretion will decrease, and then we'll see an increase in the secretion of glucagon. Both of these hormones working together to regulate blood glucose levels. Now, the adrenal gland, these glands sit on top of the kidneys, and there's two areas here within the adrenal glands, the cortex and the medulla. The outer layer, or the cortex, produces hormones that are called glucocorticoids or mineralocorticoids. Cortisol, aldosterone, these are steroids, and these are lipid in nature. You may know someone who's needed to take prednisone as an anti-inflammatory, or you may know someone that's actually had to get a cortisone injection for an injury. The adrenal medulla, this is the inner layer, and this is responsible for producing epinephrine. That's the primary hormone associated with the sympathetic nervous system, and norepinephrine, which we introduced previously as the primary neurotransmitter. Now, because epinephrine and norepinephrine are being released by the adrenal gland, they're released into the bloodstream, so they both act as hormones. Okay, so I want to make sure that you're comfortable with that. So we're looking at the global effect of norepinephrine, not the local effect that we see as a neurotransmitter. So very, very important to keep that in mind. Now, the mineralocorticoids, and cortisol is probably the best example. Its secretions are mediated through hypothalamus pituitary secretion, so ACTH. And what that does basically maintains blood glucose levels during prolonged fasting. it also is responsible for suppression of the inflammatory response, hence its use as an anti-inflammatory drug. Mineralocorticoids, aldosterone is probably the best example. What aldosterone does, it regulates sodium, potassium, water balance, and it actually acts on the kidneys, primarily responsible for sodium reabsorption and potassium excretion. Now, there's a connection between the adrenal medulla, and once again, we consider this to be neuroendocrine organ. It's stimulated through sympathetic nervous activity. Now, the hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, they're not steroids, and we've already kind of looked at their role previously with regards to the autonomic nervous system. Now, thyroid and parathyroid glands, and we can actually see the thyroid very, very obvious, okay? Here we can actually see the parathyroid's not very large, okay? This is on the posterior aspect of the larynx. Now, the thyroid, once again, is located just below the larynx within the neck, and the parathyroid glands are embedded on the back of the thyroid. Now, thyroid and parathyroid are involved in calcium balance. Now, thyroid also plays a significant role in regulating metabolism, and that is directly through the action of thyroid hormone, or thyroxine. Now, when we look at the secretion, it's actually mediated by the hypothalamus pituitary secretions. Remember, one of the hormones released by the anterior pituitary, thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, also remember, thyroxine, T3 and T4, they fall under the category of steroid hormones. Now, what they do is they primarily regulate the production of ATP from glucose and have a big impact on the metabolic rate. The other hormone produced by the thyroid is calcitonin. This actually lowers blood calcium levels. It decreases the rate of bone resorption by inhibiting osteoclasts. Those are the cells that are responsible for breaking bone down. And it also stimulates the uptake of calcium by bones. So I want you to keep in mind that the primary role of calcitonin is to lower circulating levels of calcium within the blood. Now, here we're basically looking at the role of thyroxine, and we're using cold as the example here. Okay, so cold temperatures, we see the set point decrease. We're going to see an increase in the release of thyroid stimulating hormone. The impact will be on the thyroid to release thyroxine, and then we see basically back to set point, and overall increasing metabolic rate, which is one of the ways the body has of thermoregulation. Now, iodine deficiency can cause what's known as goiter. Iodine is required for the production of active thyroid hormones. Now, this is not necessarily a problem in the United States, but there are some areas in the country where there is inadequate dietary iodine, and so this results in an underproduction of thyroid hormones. The feedback response to inadequate thyroid hormone is for the hypothalamus and pituitary to further stimulate the thyroid, and this results in hypertrophy of the thyroid known as a goiter, and you can see that here, okay, that significant growth in the neck area where the thyroid should be, and that's due to iodine deficiency. Not a problem in the United States because our salt that we consume is iodized. Now, calcitonin, this is the other hormone, and this promotes bone growth. So calcitonin inhibits osteoclasts. This decreases bone resorption. Calcitonin also stimulates the uptake of calcium by bones. This is particularly important for bone growth and development in children, and overall decreases blood calcium levels, which we saw previously. Now, parathyroid hormone, this is actually going to be released in response to low blood calcium levels. What it's going to do is actually remove calcium and phosphate from bone. It's going to increase the absorption of calcium by the digestive tract, and it's going to tell the kidneys to hang on to calcium and excrete phosphate. Overall, all of these actions that are promoted by parathyroid hormone result in an increase in blood calcium levels. Typically, parathyroid hormone is the primary regulator of blood calcium levels in adults. Here we can basically see the feedback mechanism. So we see a decrease in blood levels of calcium. We can see the parathyroid gland, which is going to cause the kidneys overall, okay, to save calcium, okay, and we can see them also going to the bones to release calcium, okay, and it's going to decrease calcitonin. So really what we're looking at here is the overall impact of parathyroid hormone, and look what we're overall doing here, okay. We're basically looking at an increase or calcium levels going back to the set point of what they're supposed to be. So this is the feedback mechanism relative to a fall or decrease in blood levels of calcium, and it's going to be the opposite here, okay. So when we look at an increase in circulating levels of calcium in the blood, notice what happens. We see decreased levels of parathyroid hormone, and then we see calcitonin, okay, which is primarily going to have bones take up calcium, okay, and that overall is going to result in blood calcium levels normalizing and getting back to their set point. Now, the testes, they produce testosterone. Now, the functions of testosterone and other androgens are, before birth, responsible for the development of external male genitalia. At the onset of puberty, testosterone is going to be responsible for regulating the development and normal functioning of sperm, male reproductive organs, male sex drive. It's going to be primarily responsible for regulating the development of secondary male sex characteristics. Now, to keep in mind, there are small amounts of androgens produced by the adrenal glands in both males and females. Now, the ovaries are going to be producing estrogen and progesterone. These are steroids, as was testosterone. Estrogen is initiating development of secondary sex characteristics. It regulates the menstrual cycle along with progesterone. Now, here we can see an overall list associated with the endocrine function associated with the hormones that we have talked about in this screencast.